My name is Lenore Bienenfeld Weinstein. Today's date is October 29th, 1996. I am here to interview Inge Lewissohn, who is a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. I am doing this under the auspices of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated. The purpose of this interview is to add to the oral history of the Holocaust, so that through this living memorial, future generations will know what happened. With this knowledge, we hope to prevent any such occurrence in the future. Can you please tell me your name?
Inge Lewissohn.
Can you spell your name?
Lewissohn.
What was your given name at birth?
Inge Margot Edel. E-D-E-L.
Did you go by any other names?
No.
We shall begin by talking about the city from which you came from. Where were you born?
In Berlin.
And what was your date of birth?
January the 10th, 1915.
Okay, we will be talking about the pre-war years now.
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
In Berlin.
Can you describe to me what it was like growing up in Berlin?
It was, before Hitler, it was very easy. I had friends, Gentile, Jewish, and there were no problems until Hitler came in 1933. My father died in 1931 of a natural cause, and my mother and I, we lived together. I went to work when I was 16 years old to make some money to help her, and worked in a very expensive store like Gucci, and learned about everything: leather, metal, stationery, jewelry. For 6 years I worked there. Then 1936 I got married.
Before we talk about getting married, I'd like to talk about your childhood a little bit. Do you know about how large the Jewish population was in Berlin when you were growing up?
No, a lot. Millions.
And how many people were in Berlin?
I don't know.
Do you know how most of the Jewish people earn their living?
Working in all kinds of places, like all over the world.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about your family. What were your parents' names?
My father's name was Felix. My mother's name was Charlotte. I was an only child.
Did you know your grandparents?
Grandmothers only. My father's father died when he was young, so I have no idea about him. My mother's father died when I was about 5 years old, so I don't remember. My grandmothers were still alive when I left Germany.
Did your family attend a synagogue or have any religious affiliations?
Yeah, they belonged to a synagogue, and for the high holidays we always went to the synagogue. My father went whenever he could on Saturday, but most of the time he was working. In Germany you worked Saturday half a day at least, at that time.
What kind of work did your father do?
He worked in a store where they sold material for men's clothing, clothes, you know, and to make suits, and all what belongs to it, the trimmings and everything that belongs to it.
Did your mother work?
No, she never worked, as far as I remember.
Did your family belong to any organizations or movements?
No, not that I know of.
And what about political parties?
No idea.
How far did you go to school?
I went to, not to the Abitur, a year before I stopped, as I was always sick, and it didn't work out in school.
How many years did you go?
Until I was 16.
Until you started working?
Yeah.
Was it a private school or public school?
No, public school.
And did you get any Jewish education?
Yes, in school.
Can you describe what kinds of things?
I don't remember. It's too long ago.
Before the Hitler came to power, do you remember any incidents of anti-Semitism?
No, only afterwards.
Okay, can you describe what it was like when the first time you encountered Nazis?
My husband looked very Jewish, and I did not at all. So in the street sometimes they said, "Why are you going with this Jew? You shouldn't." These were the first times we encountered it.
Do you remember when this was?
Maybe 35, 34, 35.
When did you meet
36.
your husband?
1931.
What was his name?
Lewissohn. He had one sister who was 2 years younger, who went in 33 to Israel.
What do you remember from when Hitler first came to power?
We could only go to Jewish restaurants, you could only go to Jewish theaters. Traveling out of the country was difficult. You only had then Jewish friends, and you got together only with the Jewish friends.
Do you remember seeing any head Nazis or commandants coming into your town?
No, Berlin was big, so there were a lot. But I had no recollection of seeing anything unusual.
Do you remember the first time you saw the Nazis marching?
No, I didn't see them in the street marching. Where I lived, there were more rich people living, and they were in the beginning not that involved with the Nazis. Where I worked, it was a Jewish store, and when the Nazis came, there was a, what did they call it, not a Sturmführer, but some higher. He was a nobody before, and suddenly he was somebody. And he always was a young middle-aged man, and he always liked me for some reason. And he said, "Don't tell me, you can't be Jewish, you don't look Jewish." I had reddish hair and freckles, and that didn't go with their picture of Jews. And he said, "You know, you have to leave the company, but tell me you are not Jewish, then you don't have to leave." And I said, "I can't do that. I am Jewish, even if you don't believe it." He could not believe that I was Jewish. And after I was married 1 year, I had to leave. That was the law.
And when was this?
1936 I got married, so 37 I had to leave. I was there 7 years. Six years, excuse me.
Do you recall any anti-Semitic acts happening to you or your family members during that time?
No.
And then what happened once you left the store?
My father-in-law had a factory for grindstones, from the smallest to the biggest industrial ones. And they had a lot of orders from the government, and I went there to work in the office, as I couldn't find any other work. Nobody would hire me, a Gentile company. So I went there for a year and a half to work, and then we left Germany in '38, in May, as my husband saw that the war was coming with all the orders they had in the factory. He said, we have to leave, the war is coming. So he did all the preparation for 3 young couples, friends of ours, and we left together to Colombia, South America.
Tell me about the preparations.
He went to the Jewish organization, I think it was called Hitzem. I'm not 100% sure. And they prepared the papers and everything to go to Venezuela. But when all the papers were done, Venezuela said no more Jews. That was the end of that. We didn't know where Venezuela is. We went to the map and looked at it. In school we only learned about Argentina, Brazil and Chile, the ABC states. The rest of South America didn't exist. So then they said, okay, now you go to Colombia. Again we went to the map to see where is Colombia, which is next to Venezuela. Today everybody knows it. So we got all our papers and they sent us to Bogota, to Colombia. No money, no language, no family, nothing.
When was this?
38, May 38.
Where did you go to leave? From where did you leave?
From Berlin. We packed whatever we could. I mean, we had it packed and the Nazis were standing next to the crates where it was packed to see that we don't take any silver or money or jewelry or whatever. You could take furniture, which we didn't have anyway. You could take sheets and pillowcases and dishes, but nothing that was worth anything. So we took that along and we went with our friends to France, to Le Havre, and went from there with a French ship. As my husband didn't want to go on a German ship, he was afraid they would turn around in the middle of the Atlantic and go back in case of a war. So we went with a terrible French ship. But everybody said, be happy and be glad that you can leave.
Do you remember if you had exit visas?
We must have. I don't remember it. We had visas to go into Colombia. And we had to pay quite a lot of money for us at that time, which was paid before, as you could only take out of Germany 10 marks. That is like you leave today with $10, which is nothing. That was all what we were allowed to take officially. Thank God my father-in-law had some money, as he always traveled to other countries, France and Belgium and Holland, for business. He had some money tucked away in, other foreign money. So he gave that to us, and my mother-in-law put it, I don't know if you remember, in a roll of leather that you polish your nails with. There she put it in and tied it up so it looked like a nail polisher. Thank God they didn't find it. As if they catch you, that's the end of it. So we had a little bit of money, but nothing to speak about. And when we came to Colombia, to Bogota, we had nothing, absolute nothing.
Before we talk about coming to Bogota, how long did you plan to leave Germany?
About 6 months.
And how did you feel about leaving?
Oh yeah, my mother was also for it. She said, go. But we had to leave her there. My in-laws were there. My father-in-law was not happy that we went so far. But in the end, he went to, he was a stubborn man. That's all men are. He went, after we left, he went to work in France or Belgium. And from there he went, if he was in Belgium, then he went to France. I don't remember that. And there they caught him and he disappeared, just disappeared. And my mother lived in Berlin underground a while after we left. My mother was taken 1942 to a concentration camp and died there a short while after. At that time they didn't gas, so she must have died of a natural cause by not having food or whatever.
How did you find out?
My mother-in-law wrote us on a Red Cross letter. That was the only thing they could use, that she went on vacation, and that meant that they took her. And a while she said she's still on vacation, and then she must have died. My mother-in-law lived in Berlin underground due to false papers that the policeman gave her and other people. She had to leave her apartment, and she lived, that's in the diary, every day somewhere else. With Gentile people. She worked for an officer who knew exactly who she was, but he gave her money and he gave her food. She walked, I don't know how many miles, it's unbelievable, to get to this place to work in order to get food. And there she did this until 1944, when they caught that policeman and found a list of all the people he gave false paper. So they caught her and they took her, I don't know, Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, I don't remember. It was such a pity, so short before the end of the war she was caught. She was such a nice person.
What were your in-laws' names?
Cecilia and Ludwig Lewissohn.
And now I'd like you to tell me a little bit what it was like when you first came to Bogota.
It was terrible. It was cold. I think today it's not that cold, but at that time it was very cold. We went to bed with not pajamas, but getting dressed. We went to bed, you know, like sweatshirts and sweatpants. It was very cold. We had no money. We didn't know anybody. Only the Jewish organization was disorganized. As the people were there a short time, like they came maybe a month before, 2 months before, and they didn't know much. Nobody spoke Spanish. It's very, very hard. You have no money, you have no family, you have nobody. My children could never understand it, that you really don't have money to buy anything extra but bread, bananas. Thank God bananas were cheap. We bought a whole, in Spanish, racimo of bananas. They were cheap, and oranges, and rice. Rice was very cheap, so we ate rice with plantains and plantains with rice. That was all what we ate.
What did you and your husband do for work?
I didn't do anything in the beginning. My husband couldn't find anything. You know, there were suddenly so many immigrants. And the Colombians, nobody spoke Spanish. What did the Colombians do with us? The Jewish organization gave my husband a job for men who repaired rifles, all kinds of little things. So my husband went there. He had to pay 10 cents for the streetcar to go there, which was too much money. And on the end of the week, the man said, I have no money to pay you. So he laid out 70 cents, or no, let's say 60 cents, which for us was a fortune. He went only 1 week. Then he did all kinds of things, electrician, plumbing. We made lampshades that nobody bought. It was hard. It was really hard. We lived all together, the 3 couples, and every day everybody came home with one word, new word in Spanish. That is the way we learned Spanish. We couldn't afford, there was a young Jewish man who had lived in Spain. He gave Spanish classes for 50 cents a person, but we didn't have 50 cents. So we had to learn on our own. Then, unfortunately, we were there in July. In January, I found out I was pregnant, which was absolute not wanted. But what can you do? So we started with a little grocery store where I was all day, learning Spanish from a young soldier who lived with a lieutenant or general somewhere around the corner, and he came every day. He had nothing else to do to taught me Spanish, which was marvelous. And this little store got a little bigger, but it was very, very difficult work. And if you are not young, you cannot do that.
What was the name of the other couples who came with you?
It was Hans and Ellen Bromet, and what was his name? Heinz and Marga Holschauer.
Did you know anybody else where you were?
Nobody. My husband had a recommendation from my mother-in-law for somebody in Bogota. I have to laugh, when we went there and my husband found out the man was in jail. That was a recommendation. So that was no, we didn't know anybody.
Do you know the name of the Jewish organization that helped you, or helped your husband with work?
The highest. But as I say, the people there didn't know anything and didn't know Spanish either, so it was not much help. They didn't have money either. So it was very difficult.
And when were your children born?
My son was born in August 39, and then the second one was born in October 42.
Where did you go from Colombia?
We were there 20 years. We lived in Bogota, we lived in Pereira, and we lived in Cali, and from Cali we came here to New Jersey.
What year
was 58.
was that? Did you ever tell your children about your experiences in Germany and coming out of Germany?
Yes, we did.
And what about people in Colombia? Did you discuss the Holocaust with them?
They were all in the same boat. They all came from Germany, some from Berlin and many from other cities. But they all had the same experiences.
Is there any memories or experiences from Germany before you left that you'd like to bring up now?
No, not really. Not really. As I said, we couldn't go anywhere but to Jewish restaurants or anything Jewish, but not nowhere else.
What do you feel is the most important lesson of the Holocaust?
That it will not happen again, but I'm afraid that people forget. I was in Germany twice, in 1968 and in 12 years now, 74. No, 80. 85. My husband died in 84. 85, I went back for 1 week. The German paid, you know, they invite people and they paid for everything, otherwise I wouldn't have gone. And I found the same anti-Semitism as before. I went in one store, it's like a Woolworths there, and there was a woman in front of me paying something, and she was an older woman. I don't even know if she was Jewish, but the cashier was an older German woman, and she was so nasty to her and saying that the Jews, and the same thing as 30 years, 50 years before. I would never go back there. I think they are the same. The young people have nothing to do with it, but the older people are still the same. There is no change.
What are your children's names?
My surviving son is Robert. The other one was Peter, but he is dead now. This month's 25 years. He died in New Jersey.
Did you ever go back, did your children ever go to Berlin?
No, they have never been there. I was there twice, that was enough.
Okay, before we close and do the pictures, is there anything that you would like to mention about your experiences that I did not ask you about?
No, I don't think so. I really personally didn't suffer when I lived there in Berlin.
Now we're going to start with the pictures. You can tell who they are.
This is my mother, Charlotte Edel. That was taken 1938 maybe, 39, something like that. That is my father. That must have been in 1930.
Your father's name?
Felix. This is my husband, Louis, Louis. That was taken about a short time before he died in 84. These are my in-laws. That must have been 1935, something like that.
Their names?
Ludwig and Cecilia. That's my mother-in-law. She was a pianist. That's my son Peter in New Jersey. That was in, what, 1960, something like that. That's my son Robert and his wife Gloria. That's only about 2 years ago. That's my granddaughter Alexis. She is now 23. And that's about a year old. This is Michelle. She will be 21 in December.
What is this?
This is a diary of my mother-in-law when she lived underground in Berlin between 43 and 44. It's all written in German, so nobody can understand it, unfortunately.
This has been Lenore Weinstein interviewing Inge Lewissohn about her experiences as a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. This interview will be included as a valuable contribution to the Oral History Library of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated.